All right, today we are diving deep into the story of the CIA. This is the agency that has, for decades, pulled the strings of world events from deep within the shadows. And it's all been powered by a secret, off the books financial history, something called the black budget. And, this quote really gets right to the point. A black budget is exactly what it sounds like. It's funding that's completely classified, totally hidden from public view, and used for secret ops. It's the lifeblood, really, that has let the CIA do pretty much everything, from toppling foreign governments to building some of the most advanced spy tech on the planet. So where did this all start? Well, picture this. It's 1945. World War II is finally over. America's on top of the world, but there's a new shadow falling across the globe. The Soviet Union's Red Army is sprawled across half of Europe, and it suddenly dawns on Washington they have absolutely no idea what Stalin is planning next. They're flying blind. And that blindness leads directly to this, the National Security Act of 1947. This is basically the CIA's birth certificate. But here's the kicker, the part you really need to pay attention to. Look at that wording. It lets the agency perform other functions and duties. Now that little phrase, that wasn't an accident. It was a blank check for power, and it was written into the CIA's DNA from the very first day. Okay, so an agency with that much power needs cash. A lot of cash. And the chance to get it came from a really surprising place. Europe was in ruins, right? So America launched the Marshall Plan to help rebuild it. And the official price tag for that was massive, over $13 billion. But tucked away inside all that humanitarian aid was a little secret. And this chart shows it perfectly. 5% of all the money from the Marshall Plan, we're talking about $685 million, was quietly siphoned off to the brand new CIA. This was the agency's very first black budget, and they used it to bribe politicians and run secret propaganda campaigns all over Europe. But here's the thing, all that money didn't buy them success. Not at first. The early CIA was just completely out of its league. I mean, on one side, you've got the Soviet KGB. These guys were pros, ruthless, with decades of experience. And on the other side, the CIA, a bunch of well-connected rookies who had no idea what they were doing. Their operations were so compromised that one of their own internal reports said the agency was fatally penetrated. Mission after mission was just a total failure. So after getting humiliated time and time again, the agency was desperate. They needed a win, badly. They had to prove to the White House that they were worth all that secret money. And they found their big chance in Iran in 1953. The Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, had just nationalized the country's oil industry, which was controlled by the British. Britain was furious, and the CIA saw an opportunity and said, "We've got a plan." They called it Operation Ajax. And the plan was classic covert action, all paid for with that black budget. A CIA officer named Kermit Roosevelt Jr., yep, Teddy's grandson, snuck into Tehran with suitcases full of cash, over $1 million. He started bribing politicians, paying off newspapers to print stories calling Mossadegh a corrupt dictator, and he even hired mobs to run through the streets and create total chaos. It all came to a head on August 19th, when the military stormed the prime minister's home. And just like that, Iran's democracy was overthrown. Back in Langley, the Iran coup was seen as this huge success, a work of art. But the agency was smart. They knew they couldn't keep winning against the KGB in the spy versus spy game. So they made a massive pivot. They decided to stop trying to beat the Soviets at their own game and instead lean into America's biggest advantage, technology. And the first piece of tech that completely changed the game was this thing right here, the U-2 spy plane. It was the answer to a huge problem. How do you see what the Soviets are building behind the Iron Curtain without getting shot down? And I love how our source material puts it, it's basically a spy satellite with a pilot. I mean, the U-2 was just incredible. It could fly at 70,000 feet, way, way higher than any Soviet jet or missile could reach. Its cameras were so powerful, they could take a picture of a 2-foot-wide object from 13 miles up in the air. The Soviets knew it was there. They could see it on their radar, but they were powerless to stop it. For the very first time, Washington could actually see what was happening at Soviet nuclear sites. So with these new tools and a big dose of confidence, the CIA's shadow war went global. They overthrew the government of Guatemala in '54 because its reforms threatened American companies. Then in '73, they helped orchestrate the bloody coup in Chile against the elected socialist leader Salvador Allende. But it wasn't all wins. The Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, their attempt to overthrow Fidel Castro in Cuba, was a complete disaster and a very public one at that. And then, well, then there was the really dark stuff. During this same period, the CIA started something called Project MKUltra. It was this secret, frankly terrifying program that was obsessed with the idea of mind control. They were experimenting with LSD, hypnosis, even psychological torture, a lot of the time on people who had no idea what was happening to them, all because they were trying to create a real-life Manchurian candidate, a brainwashed assassin they could program to do whatever they wanted. The agency's black budget operations got even crazier and more illegal with the Iran-Contra affair back in the 80s. Okay, so get this. Here's how this insane scheme worked. The White House was secretly selling weapons to their sworn enemy, Iran, to get American hostages released. But they jack up the prices, took the extra profits, and moved them to secret Swiss bank accounts. Then they funneled that money to anti-communist rebels, the Contras, down in Nicaragua. It was completely off the books and totally illegal. So then, in 1991, the Soviet Union just collapses, and the CIA suddenly has this massive identity crisis. I mean, their main rival, their whole reason for being, was gone. Their purpose was totally unclear. Budgets got slashed, CIA stations were closed down. But that quiet time? It was not going to last. A whole new kind of enemy was about to emerge, one that didn't have a country or a flag or any kind of traditional army. On September 11th, 2001, that new enemy made its move. Almost 3,000 people were killed in the attacks. And just like that, in a single morning, the CIA had a new crystal-clear mission: find the people who did this and make them pay. But the very first big move in this new war was a complete disaster, a catastrophic intelligence failure. The CIA was absolutely convinced that Saddam Hussein in Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. And this intelligence, which was presented to the entire world by people like Secretary of State Colin Powell, was the whole reason for the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The only problem? It was all wrong. There were no WMDs. The war in Iraq turned into a mess, but at the same time, it pushed forward a technological revolution at the agency. The old ways of taking out targets, risky raids, messy car bombs, were just not efficient, and what took their place was the drone program. Suddenly, a pilot could be sitting in a chair in Nevada hunting a target on the other side of the world. It was faster, it was cheaper, and it turned the CIA into a global hunter-killer machine. And this new way of doing things reached its absolute peak on May 2nd, 2011. After almost a decade of searching, CIA intelligence finally tracked Osama bin Laden to a compound in Pakistan. Using all that intel, Navy SEAL Team 6 went in and they killed the man behind 9/11. For the CIA, this was the ultimate victory lap. But killing one man, even bin Laden, didn't end the fight. The entire nature of war was changing again. The new battlefield wasn't some place on a map. It was information itself. The fight was now about trying to control and make sense of these endless, massive oceans of data. And to fight on this new battlefield, the CIA needed a totally new kind of weapon. They found it in Silicon Valley. It turns out the CIA has its own venture capital firm, and one of its early investments was in a startup called Palantir. And Palantir's goal was simple: build a piece of software that could find terrorists in piles of data the same way Google finds a website for you. So how on earth does it do that? Well, it just eats up everything: phone records, bank transfers, flight manifests, even live video from drones. It takes all of that and weaves it into one single living map of the world. It allows an analyst to see hidden connections and networks that a human being could never, ever spot on their own. It lets the CIA stop just reacting to threats and start predicting them.
So the agency's mission has evolved, right? From fighting a superpower to hunting terrorists to sifting through data. But, history has a funny way of repeating itself. The old Cold War rival is gone, for sure, but a powerful new one has taken its place: China, a country that is itself a world leader in AI, surveillance, and cyber warfare. The great power competition for intelligence is back on.
Which brings us to a really fascinating final thought about the future. Remember, the CIA was created because America had a blind spot. Its entire history, everything we've talked about, has been this relentless quest to get rid of blind spots. But that leaves us with a huge question for today. In this new era of total information, with AI and surveillance everywhere, What happens when nobody, not the CIA, not China, not anybody, has a blind spot anymore? What does that world look like?